simply turn it on, and then when you're not, turn
Well, good afternoon and welcome. I am Doug Thompson. I am the manager of the Incentives Oversight section at the Air Resources Board, and we work among other things on the Carl Moyer program. And I want to welcome everyone to the workshop today. This is to discuss changes to the program coming out of Senate Bill 513, and to discuss in particular the 2017 guidelines that we've begun work on, which give us an opportunity to make some pretty fundamental changes in the program that I think will help meet the particular goals we have for incentives in California. We would certainly like to thank South Coast for hosting the workshop today and for working quite graciously with us to coordinate the setup of this. The workshop is being webcast. Thanks to South Coast for that. And if you are participating remotely, would like to email us questions or comments, we welcome that. And you can send them to CarlHelp, that's CARLHELP, at arb.ca.gov. So CarlHelp at arb.ca.gov, and we'll be glad to take questions via email. This is the first of 3 workshops. Actually, it's the same workshop in 3 different places. Next Tuesday, March 8th, we'll be in the San Joaquin Valley. The workshop will be video conferenced from there to the San Joaquin regional offices in Modesto and Bakersfield. And the final workshop will be in Sacramento next Thursday, March 10th, at the Cal EPA building. That will be offered also via webinar. So I want to introduce the folks at the table here. Maybe we'll start with Neva Lowry, who is lead staff on the 2017 guidelines update.
I'm Scott Rowland. I oversee the Carl Moyer program for ARB.
I'm Fred Manassian, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer with South Coast AQMD.
I'm Aaron Hilliard. I'm the manager over the Carl Moyer on-road programs, marine vessels, and light-duty vehicles.
And Dave Salardino, ARB, one of the Carl Moyer managers overseeing most of the off-road categories.
Good, thank you. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Neva to make the presentation.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, this is an overview slide about what we're going to talk about in today's presentation. First, we're going to briefly go over the purpose of the program and the background. And then we're going to talk about Senate Bill 513, what it accomplished and what it intends. We'll review the program development areas, including cost effectiveness, leveraging, and infrastructure, among other things. Then we'll step through the different source categories. We'll highlight some of those, and we'll wrap it up with what's coming up next. So I just want to say that we encourage comments and questions. The purpose of the workshop is to solicit feedback, and so we're in the beginning of the program development, and we really want to hear from you. So we're here to share information and have dialogue about the different programs and get feedback. So we encourage you to participate in the public process, and thank you for coming. So this is an overview slide for the Carl Moyer program. So the Carl Moyer program was established in 1998 by the California legislation to improve air quality in the state. The program grants funds to purchase cleaner than required engines, equipment, and emission reduction technologies. And we fund equipment, engines, and technology that are cleaner than what's required to go above and beyond the standard. And so there's surplus. The Carl Moyer program is a statewide incentive program. Its objective is to achieve cost-effective emission reductions of NOx, nitrogen oxides, ROG, and PM, particulate matter. Ongoing funding for the Carl Moyer program comes from the smog abatement and tire fees. The program is authorized at $69 million per year, and it's implemented in partnership with the districts. The districts administer the program. Districts have the flexibility to be more stringent than the guidelines, and so they have to meet the levels of the guidelines, and then they go beyond that. Local air districts have also been authorized their own funding streams through vehicle registration fees, and that is annually about $50 million. These funds can be used to fund Moyer-eligible projects to meet their match funding requirements. About 19 of the 35 districts statewide receive these funds. The pie chart that you see on the slide presentation displays the way funds have been distributed by source category over the last 10 years. The source categories that have received different fractions of the funding. Senate Bill 513. I'd like to start out by thanking CAPCOA, the districts, and stakeholders for all their efforts in getting SB 513 passed, and ARB staff as well. The process was informed by a collaborative working group comprised of Air District staff, stakeholders, and ARB staff. SB 513 offered us the opportunity for significant improvements to the program. Most importantly, SB 513 allows the Moyer program to help move fleets into the future, into advanced technologies. SB 513 provides flexibility to fund a broader array of infrastructure projects, to adjust cost effectiveness, to account for the cost of emerging technologies, to leverage other funds without cost effectiveness penalty, and to streamline administrative process. Please note that statute requires that new guidelines be adopted by July 1st, 2017. Implementation of SB 513. Central to this workshop, and you'll hear me say this several times throughout, is we're looking for your feedback. We're encouraging public participation. We want to hear from you and your ideas. So the Carl Moyer program, the Carl Moyer 2017 guidelines provide a mechanism to implement the changes and flexibility provided in SB 513. As many of you likely know, we have already begun this process. Earlier this year, we made changes to the guidelines that included increasing our ability to fund school bus projects and align with the low emission school bus program, extend fund leveraging opportunities, and to modify administrative deadlines. Moving forward, we're making more substantial changes and improvements to the guidelines. Fundamentally, our focus will be to simplify and streamline the guideline text and implementation requirements first. Second, to maintain program accountability and SIP, State Implementation Plan, creditability. To write framework that works for the needs of the diverse districts in the state, including large, medium, and small districts. And to make sure we're aligned with the goals of other programs, such as regulations, other incentive programs. Now we're going to move into the portion of the presentation that discusses program development. So we're going to talk about infrastructure, cost effectiveness, leveraging, and administration. Infrastructure. SB 513 enables the Carl Moyer program to better fund necessary infrastructure projects. This slide shows the specific health and safety code sections that allow Moyer to fund fueling and energy infrastructure projects. Infrastructure projects are exempt from the cost effectiveness requirements. We need infrastructure to support and accelerate the rollout of cleaner emerging technologies such as alternative fuel and zero-emission vehicle and equipment. Although infrastructure projects themselves do not directly result in emission reductions because they don't replace an engine or provide a technology. What they do is they enable the deployment of emerging technologies. They support the transformation of the sectors to cleaner fuels. That being said, it is necessary for the program to ensure that funds are being spent efficiently on projects that will benefit air quality and enable the use of clean vehicles and equipment. Current infrastructure ideas. Statute does not specifically dictate the infrastructure projects that are eligible for funding. This slide shows a list of possible project types that could be considered, for example, light-duty and heavy and medium-duty charging stations, solar-powered agricultural pumps, or alternative fueling stations. But we're seeking your input on if you have ideas on other possible types of infrastructure projects. Criteria to consider for infrastructure projects. Staff is working with the local air districts to determine how to build the most effective program. Key criteria we're considering are what types of projects would be eligible, who should be eligible to apply, should eligibility criteria differ between entities such as public, private sectors, does it make sense to have a project subject to specific dollar cap or percentage caps, and if so, what should those caps be? We will need to ensure accountability for the public funds, including the indirect emission reductions enabled by the infrastructure projects. Infrastructure is essential to the effective deployment of cleaner technology. The ability to fund infrastructure under this program will assist in driving the cleaner fuel markets. Infrastructure projects can be good for the economy, they help the applicant, they benefit industry, they help air quality, and they support planning efforts such as sustainable freight and SIP goals. Now we're going to move into cost effectiveness. SB 513 provides much needed flexibility for the Moyer program to meet future technology needs. The statute allows ARB, in consultation with the Air District, to establish cost effectiveness limits based on the cost of technology and the cost of regulation. This slide points out the specific statute changes provided by SB 513 related to cost effectiveness. These were pivotal changes. New cost effectiveness context, thank you. A new context for cost effectiveness. The current cost effectiveness limit is set at 18,260 tons dollars per ton of weighted emission reduction. Originally, in 1998, when the program began, the cost effectiveness limit was set at $12,000 per ton. And that value has incrementally been increased every year based on inflation. As per SB 513, we're looking at establishing a new cost effectiveness limit based on the cost of emerging technologies. We must consider the incremental cost of zero and near zero technologies in this analysis so that cleaner choices are made and California can meet its SIP commitments. Did it go? The new limit must carefully balance the need to maximize near-term emission reductions while incentivizing advanced technologies that cost more. In trying to balance these needs, we're evaluating the incremental cost of the emerging technology and asking what cost effectiveness level is needed to provide enough incentives for cleaner technologies while still maximizing program funds. Recently, the cost effectiveness limit for school bus projects was set at $276,230 per ton. This limit allows the Moyer program to fund zero-emission school bus projects consistent with the low-emission school bus program cost caps. We also ask, are there other mechanisms available to affect emission reductions or grant amounts beyond increasing the cost effectiveness limit? For example, leveraging? Now we'll talk a little bit about leveraging of funds. Cost sharing was an important and necessary Carl Moyer program improvement identified by the Collaborative Working Group and districts. SB 513 provides increased flexibility to co-fund projects. This is called leveraging. Leveraging program, previously there was a limited opportunity to combine funding sources and to leverage program for co-benefit without having to include those other funds in the cost effectiveness calculation or to reduce the Moyer grant amount. The flexibility provided in SB 513 allows greater cost sharing. This provides benefits for multiple programs as well as the applicant. For example, an electrification project can reduce criteria pollutants and greenhouse gases. Leveraging allows the project to possibly be funded with both low carbon transportation fund for the greenhouse gas emission reductions and Moyer for the criteria pollutants to maximize the potential benefit to both the applicant and air quality. This table shows the leveraging opportunities that existed in 2011 and additional leveraging opportunities implemented earlier this year as per SB 513. We have taken steps to quickly address the identified need for cost sharing. However, moving forward, we need to consider additional ways to leverage funds. I think I have one more slide. Ah, there it is. I was out of order. Leveraging considerations. We want to ensure continued SIP creditability for emission reductions with co-funded projects. Safeguards are needed in the guidelines to ensure that there is no double counting of emission reductions and that projects are not overpaid. Program guidelines will also consider if there is a need for project limitations, cost effectiveness limits, funding caps, and possible cost percentages. Encouraging cost sharing is a key element of a successful leveraging program. We would like to hear feedback about possible opportunities for cost sharing. Please send us your thoughts. Program administration. SB 513 also provides us the flexibility for program administration. We are considering areas of program administration text that can be simplified and administrative processes that can be streamlined. The guideline revision will also consider areas of administration chapter that can be removed or that are obsolete. We're also considering ways to integrate other program changes such as VIP, leveraging and infrastructure needs into the administration chapter. ARB recognizes the need to consider specific challenges faced by the rural districts. Some of these challenges include limited projects to fund in rural communities, resource constraints make administering the program difficult in some cases, diverse topography creates its own unique set of challenges. Our goal is to write guidance that works for all the districts in the state. An important part of administering the program is recognizing environmental justice needs in the state. Statute requires that districts with 1 million or more inhabitants spend 50% of their funds to reduce pollution in minority and low-income communities, environmental justice communities. We recognize that the need to ensure that disadvantaged communities participate in the Moyer program. We specifically welcome comments and recommendations on how we can ensure that the Moyer program funds help environmental justice as provided for in statute. So in this next section of the presentation, we're going to focus on some of the existing source categories. We'll talk about on-road, off-road, locomotive, marine, light-duty, and stationary portable agricultural pumps, or stationary portable pumps, or engines, sorry. They used to be called agricultural pumps, so I get those confused. On-road heavy-duty vehicles. These are initial thoughts for the on-road heavy-duty categories and are intended to start the conversation, and we welcome ideas. We want to incentivize the purchase of cleaner technologies beyond the 2010 standard required by the truck and bus rule. Decreasing surplus emission reductions due to regulations and higher cost of new technology elevates the need for a cost-effectiveness limit that will support cleaner technologies. The main driver to accomplish that will be to increase funding to foster new technologies coming onto the market. Providing incentive funds for emerging technologies helps the applicant, the manufacturer, and the economy overall. In turn, this will increase production, drive down costs, and facilitate broad acceptance of cleaner vehicles to support the state and local air quality goals. We also want to streamline the guidelines to help districts and applicants implement the program. We are considering merging vehicle replacement programs such as VIP and fleet modernization. We may want to take out project types that are underutilized, such as retrofits, and consolidating emission factor tables and accounting for deterioration in emission rates, which may also affect eligible funding amounts. Overall, we want to make on-road options more consistent so that they work better for the applicant and the district. Off-road. Off-road equipment. Similar to the on-road program, we'd like to incentivize cleaner technologies for the off-road sector and simplify the guidelines to make off-road projects easier to implement. Staff is considering combining off-road VIP and equipment replacement into one program in an effort to streamline. We invite comments on that proposal. Current guidelines include many criteria discussing non-Tier 4 engine equipment eligibility. Since the intent of the program is to get the cleanest equipment into fleets, it may be time to consider only Tier 4 or cleaner repowers and replacements. We also invite comments on this concept. We are seeking input into criteria for trade-up projects in which the owner of an older, high-emitting mobile equipment agrees to scrap that equipment and trade up to a cleaner, used equipment for minimal out-of-pocket costs. This used equipment comes from another owner that relinquishes it for an incentive to purchase a new equipment with the cleanest commercially available technology. So this is the Plus Up program we're considering implementing. I would like to hear from you on that as well. Trade up. Funding for large fleets subject to the in-use off-road diesel fleet regulation will end January 1st, 2017. Staff is considering whether funding limitations should be adjusted depending upon if the fleet is small, medium, or large. Last, staff is looking for suggestions on how to simplify the off-road repower criteria. For example, the installation of filters is only necessary for equipment in large fleets meeting the off-road regulation. If large fleets are not eligible for funding or engines meet Tier 4 standard, meeting Tier 4 standards are required and already meet filter-based standards, requiring a filter with repowers is less critical a goal for the program. Locomotives. Locomotive projects are very complicated, and our desire is to make the program work with how industry functions. Like the other source categories, we want to encourage cleaner technology and streamline implementation. We recognize the value in letting the applicant retain the chassis while still destroying the old engine, and we will consider that type of option. Allowing locomotive projects to commence prior to EPA certification and ARB verification will help drive the manufacturer to seek certification and verification of a new technology. We're also evaluating whether to revise the maximum funding amounts and implement caps. With locomotive technology advancement, we wonder whether we still need funding to fund idle limiting devices, since all new locomotives already have this incorporated into their software. And we ask, are there any other technologies we should be considering, such as hood units? Marine projects. We'd like to broaden the reach of the marine program and encourage technologies beyond the requirements. Staff is considering project scope expansion to include funding opportunities for vessel equipment with large spark ignition engines, zero and near zero technologies, and other vessel efficiency improvements that provide quantifiable surplus emission reductions. Additionally, staff is considering increasing the maximum funding opportunities for vessels subject to the commercial harbor freight regulation. Light-duty vehicles. We're seeking comments regarding potential changes to the light-duty vehicle chapter. In addition to the continuation of the voluntary light-duty vehicle retirement program, staff is considering the potential inclusion of a retire and replace component. This would allow leveraging and linking up with the popular Enhanced Fleet Modernization, EFMP Plus Up program to disadvantaged communities statewide. EFMP Plus Up is currently operating in the South Coast and San Joaquin Valley air districts. Plus Up funds are offered in addition to EFMP funds to increase incentives to purchase advanced technologies and hybrid electric vehicles. A concept we're considering is to provide a tiered incentive structure that will maximize incentives for the newest and cleanest available vehicle technologies. Portable and stationary agricultural sources. We also welcome comments on portable stationary agricultural sources. We're considering, one, providing clarity on which engine tiers are still eligible for replacement or retrofit per stationary portable air toxics control measure, ATCM. Two, to explore methods to incentivize zero and near zero emission projects with an emphasis on diesel to electric conversions. Also, there is we're considering reducing emphasis on retrofits, and it may be possible to deem retrofits not eligible. Next steps. So that concludes the most of the presentation, and we're just going to talk about what's coming up next for the Moyer program. As we mentioned, there's going to be 2 more workshops to present the same information next week. One in San Joaquin Valley, one in Sacramento. And then we hope to have a second workshop this summer to go over more defined concepts and possibly have a draft. And then we're hoping to publish proposed guidelines for public comment in the fall, winter, so the end of the year. And then in spring 2017, we intend to present guidelines to the board for consideration. So here's a contact slide. If you have any questions, you can write Carl Help at arb.ca.gov, and then here's some, if you need to contact any of us, our names are there, so please feel free. So that concludes the presentation, and we'd like to welcome any questions or comments from the public. Thank you all for attending.
And in addition to the folks at the table, we do have several of our source category experts here from our El Monte and Sacramento offices, and if I could ask for you folks' assistance in passing the microphones around, that'd be great. So and Fred?
Yeah, just before getting started with the questions, I just want to express our thanks, our agency's thanks to ARB for working closely with us. through the adoption of SB 513 and adoption of these new guidelines, ARB has been working very closely with us and other air districts. So anything that is presented here, it's a joint effort with inputs taken from us. Also, having said that, I want to announce that at our tomorrow's board meeting, our year 18 Carl Moyer program announcement will be issued. It's up for our board approval. It will be posted on our website on Tuesday. It's going to be open from tomorrow until June 1st. So this program announcement that is going to be issued will include the current guidelines, including the changes that ARB has issued or has approved in their mail out of January 1st. That would be this year's guidelines. And we are anticipating to go to our board by fall of this year with the awards. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Fred. So we're open for questions and comments.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Wood from San Diego County with Hawthorne Rented Service Company. I came here with hopes of making a suggestion. It appears that staff has already been considering it. And one of the concerns we had with the Carl Moyer program, well, first of all, what we feel, the Carl Moyer program's been a great program. It's been good for industry, it's been good for manufacturers, it's been good for state air quality goals. And it's done wonders in our area down there. One of our concerns was the phasing out of funding opportunity for large fleets. Tier 4 final technology has just become available in its entirety. And the large fleets won't have the opportunity to trade in their Tier 0 machines, high horsepower Tier 0 machines, for Tier 0 or Tier 4 final machine replacements. We believe that many of the high horsepower Tier 0 machines will be operating for at least another 3 to 5 years based on back credits that these large fleets have stored. And we see it as an opportunity that's been lost to not allow the Tier 4 or the large fleets to be involved with full funding opportunity moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, my name's Jeep Tharp with TC Construction. We're down in Santee, East County of San Diego. And we're a large fleet. I wanted to touch on what Jeff said. We've done the program 3 or 4 years now, and we replaced 16 machines. Tier 4 final, there's only 3 out of the 16 because they just weren't available during the process of the program. And looking forward, we still, we have 120 machines still in our fleet, over 15,000 horsepower that, we can still be a big part of the program to clean up the fleet and, clean up emissions. So not being a part of it in 2017 and beyond, I think it definitely limits how active people will be in San Diego. There's still quite a few large fleets that would participate, and without that, I don't know if we wouldn't get the benefit, definitely not in San Diego, if you guys remove the large fleets. Tier 4 final, just this last year in 2015, we got 1 machine last year, 1 smaller excavator, and it wasn't available until November was when it became Tier 4 final. And there's many other machines last year that just became available. So if we can keep participating, we can change Tier 0, Tier 1 machines to Tier 4 final. Another topic I want to touch on, like for like, over time, we're trading an excavator for an excavator, similar horsepower, similar working abilities. But if you take the engine Say, for an example, we're trading in an excavator, 300 horsepower, and it's tier 0 or tier 1, and we submit a clean machine that's tier 4 final, similar horsepower, say it's 250 to 300 horsepower, but it's a wheel loader. You know, and then, because as a construction company, you can make a better decision on a piece of equipment that you would need more than an excavator. You're still cleaning up the air with the benefit of going from tier 0 or tier 1 to the tier 4 final machine. Horsepower, real similar, but the basis is cleaning the air, even though it's a different machine. And then the contractor puts that money where he needs it for the equipment that he needs based on his projects. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Matt Schrapp from Velocity Vehicle Group. Interesting echo. On the on-road side, I have several questions, but I'll start with the initial one. When we talk about combining VIP in the fleet modernization program, would that incorporate then fleet size limitations or anything else that would preclude larger fleets in the on-road side from pursuing Carl Moyer money if those two programs are combined?
Thanks for your question, Matt. I think at this point, what we want to do is take into consideration different vocations in streamlining the guidelines. At this point, it's really conceptual and just that we want to simplify and not have multiple replacement chapters. So I think all the needs of different vocations and different fleet sizes will be taken into consideration.
Okay, so that really wasn't my question. My question was, are you going to put a cap? You know, vocationally speaking is one thing, but putting a cap in the on-road side, when we're talking about near zero, zero emission, zero tailpipe emission, whatever we're talking about, these are extremely expensive pieces of equipment that really only large fleets are going to be able to afford, to be honest. So, you know, combining other program dollars and whatnot, that'll help offset, but, you know, kind of food for thought, and I'm sure that there'll be many in the industry who will chime in on this same concept once you guys release your draft guidelines at the end of the year. But something to keep in mind is that, you know, the on-road and the off-road, they're much different. And, you know, understanding these gentlemen's concerns about large fleets in the off-road category and the on-road side, when we are literally staring potentially at a mandate for zero emission equipment in certain vocations, and I'd like to break down what you guys are describing as vocations also in a second, that should be seriously taken into consideration, that a number of truck cap will only hurt the program.
Let me comment on that, and then you can continue. I think what we've seen as we look at the history of the Moyer program, initially there were no fleet size caps, and then as an in-use fleet rule was adopted and implemented, the board made a clear policy decision to make resources available to the smaller players in the arena. I think you make a good point that as we look at the future, we're really kind of in some ways back where we were before the fleet rules, and that everybody is looking at having to go above and beyond. I would say that there's not necessarily a mandated regulation to move to those zero emissions, but certainly the overall policy goals are to move to that. And I think it does warrant re-looking at whether, for instance, if we are funding a zero emission truck, if there does need to be a cap on that, or maybe that it would be more appropriate to remove the cap on the most advanced technologies, but say possibly retain a cap for something like our current VIP program, which is essentially doing diesel to diesel repowers. So basically there's the opportunity that we have in front of us is to basically recognize that different types of projects work for different entities and achieve different goals, and might be looked at a little bit differently as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. Now, of course, While we are trying to do that, we are also trying to simplify the program as much as possible so somebody doesn't stare at, a pile of 4 different descriptions of different programs saying, which one fits for me?
You mean like now?
So the idea is to make it simpler for an applicant to get into the process, make it simpler for the districts to, figure out what is needed. But I think that there does need to be that recognition that different vocations or different policy goals for technologies may require deviations at the back end as opposed to at the front end.
I can appreciate that, and thank you for your comments. And, and the VIP program has been successful. Now it went from 3 back up to 10 with good cause, because there was like 1 application that came through for South Coast, I think, for 3 or fewer, if even. So understanding that completely, needing to have streamlined, simplified programs is going to be a boon for everybody, the districts, the state, the end users, the dealers, whomever. But again, from a boots on the ground perspective of who've been working with fleets both on-road and off-road, simple is better, right? KISS, we all know that acronym. When we talk about these limitations, I think more from an economic perspective, if you're talking about combining multiple sources of funding to go and purchase this equipment, a cap in that regard where obviously the state doesn't need to be paying 100% of the cost of a piece of equipment. So maybe more focus should be put in on, well, are we going to do 90% of the total cost? Is it going to be a percentage of incremental cost between diesel versus the alternative fuel side, or zero emission, or what have you? So I know we're kind of in the long view right now. Clearly, there's nothing that we're hanging our hat on, but I can say, and I can speak for my industry in particular, that being on the dealer finance side, as well as my brothers and sisters who are actually operating these vehicles on a daily basis. Right now, in the Sustainable Freight Initiative, and South Coast has made no bones about the fact that they need 400,000 low NOx engines by 2031 to even get close to the SIP goals. To approach larger fleets who are California-based and to give them an option across multiple source categories for funding is going to be more attractive than limiting a fleet size. Whether it's Gardner, for instance, who is the largest California plated fleet outside of UPS, FedEx, et cetera, they would have maybe interest in moving forward as a California-based fleet. Granted, nobody wants to subsidize out-of-state fleets competing with in-state fleets. So again, just food for thought. And when we talk about vocation, is that going to be related to the actual type of work that's going to be done, or based on a GVWR category?
So I think in looking at particularly this kind of goes back to the in-use fleet rule, where I think at a certain point, when it comes to providing incentives to provide early and extra emission reductions to those fleet rules, particularly in rural areas, I'm thinking logging. It doesn't. Sometimes what the person is actually doing in their day-to-day job doesn't actually fit where they, which compliance option they're taking in the rule. And so, since we are, we do have to provide early and excess emission reductions to the rule. We wanted to take a look at. I think the question is open. We wanted to revisit what vocation means and how we provide incentives to support what a person is doing, whether that's a particular truck configuration, a particular area of the state, or a particular configuration. We want to revisit kind of how we are putting different people in different bins. And so I think at this point, the determination of how we do that is very open, but we want to make sure that we're providing opportunities to as many people in the state as possible. So
I love that, and more food for thought. I have the microphone now, so no one else is asking questions. So I can appreciate that, and we talk about NOx exempt counties. If we want to talk about timber, there is no NOx requirement on that back end. All they have to do is meet the PM requirements. For the most part, those timber eligible vehicles are not necessarily leaving the NOx exempt counties, right? So from a geographical perspective, and then from a vocational side, of course, the rule needs to be taken into account, but unless you're in one of those exemptions, the rule is basically for heavier 2601 and greater is in effect. You don't have the opportunity to operate a non-retrofitted vehicle in California in that category unless you're in an exemption. So, I can appreciate that, and I'm sure that people will be responding to, the most appropriate categories. The one thing that always jumps out at me is, the Sustainable Freight Initiative, again, we're looking at zero emission last mile delivery for class 4 through 6 engines. So that in and of itself, last mile delivery, I guess that would be a vocation. And you have other vehicles that might be, I guess, appropriate for that type of platform that are outside of last mile delivery. Granted, plug-in adds some limitations, or even some of the hydrogen charging, or fuel cell charging, whatever it is, you need to be close so you don't end up in the middle of nowhere without any energy to your vehicles. So looking forward to continuing that discussion and keeping in mind what the rule is. Again, the rule is soon going to be in complete full effect. Exemptions gone, everything else is gone by the time all this is rolling. So what I envision is another rule that's going to be happening. So hopefully it'll be on the front end so we can get these surplus emissions reductions and really encourage fleets who are actually going to be interested in getting this. You go talk to a logger right now, he doesn't want to have anything to do with natural gas. He doesn't want to have anything to do with hydrogen, hybrids, anything. Diesel is the lifeblood of the trucking industry. It always has been, and it will be everywhere else except for California, I imagine, in the future. That other question, and kind of revisiting what near zero or zero emission is, if it is specifically tailored towards zero or near zero emission, I imagine that's really going to remove the diesel component completely. Granted, the engine manufacturers aren't just sitting on their hands. They know what California is trying to accomplish with the low NOx federal standard, but it might be worth looking at potentially in particular vocational categories that maybe a low NOx engine that's not 0.02 grams, but maybe 0.05 or 0.1 that can use a diesel platform might still be a viable option and able to achieve significant reductions, especially in localized near environmental justice communities or wherever. We have a tendency to get short-sighted when we see this technology on the horizon. It's not that easy. I have guys now who are trying to turn in their natural gas trucks that they've been operating because there's so many issues. And then when you face down a new mandate of additional technology, engine manufacturers have to sacrifice NOx reductions in order to get efficiency. It's never a straight trade-off. It's GHG or NOx. What do you want? Well, we want RNG with 0.02 gram engines. That's what the state of California wants, basically. So I appreciate that. And again, I'm sure that we'll continue this. I think let's see. Sorry, I'm all over the road here, obviously. I guess that's it. So thank you.
We'll give you another shot later, Matt. Don't worry. Just a reminder to anybody watching on webcast, you can send questions to CarlHelp, CARLHELP @arb.ca.gov. Please feel free to email any comments or questions to us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Drew Delaney. I'm with Associates Environmental. My comments are regarding off-road equipment. It is going to affect large fleets very much that the eligibility requirements no longer allows them to apply for funding. I would like to see in the new guidelines incorporation of a actual compliance-based eligibility, similar to what soon was intended to be. Theoretically, a fleet with all Tier 4 equipment right now couldn't apply for funding on any vehicles if they were large, even though they meet the final requirements of the off-road diesel regulation. So if they had a tier 0 in their fleet and everything else was tier 4 final and met the final requirements of the regulation, they couldn't get funding for that tier 0 just because they were a large fleet. They would be surplus emissions because they're already completing the regulation. So actual compliance-based eligibility requirement would be handy in that sense. And that may extend to other fleets that don't meet the final requirements, but may meet the requirements for the length of the Carl Moyer contract. And second, although there may not be a whole lot of applications out there currently for this situation, it may be beneficial to include a diesel to 0 or near 0 fuel project in the off-road equipment guidelines.
Thank you for that.
I would just like to ask you, can you comment more on what you mean by 0 to near tier 0 project?
Well, for example, right now, you can't switch from diesel to natural gas in off-road equipment. You just can't do it.
Hi, my name is Frank Motovaso from South Coast. I just want to make a comment regarding the off-road that for large equipment, a lot of Tier 4 finals are not available. And they have to go with Tier 3 plus retrofit. And they can't sign a waiver either. Whereas for small and medium fleet, they can sign a waiver. And although the guidelines have feasibility and cost effectiveness exemption, that would hinder companies. It already hindered them to apply because of the retrofit requirement. And if that wasn't there, we would have had a lot more candidates to apply for repower.
Well, and this is Dave, and I'll just answer or respond a little bit to that. And that is one of the bullets actually that was in the slides is relooking at that retrofit requirement for those fleets. But as you mentioned, also part of what we're maybe looking at is although does it make sense to now require Tier 4s, even though they may not always be available for all categories or all categories of equipment in off-road? Are there enough out there that we would want to concentrate on getting the Tier 4s out instead of concentrating on trying to get now paying for Tier 3s or even Tier 2s in some instances? So.
Yeah, the companies don't want to go through tier 3 and then reapply for Tier 4 in general. So they rather get it done once and it's not available. But this opportunity is gone, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. So I believe it seemed to me what the comment was talking about is the repower projects for Moyer programs. Today, obviously, Tier 4 interim, Tier 4 final technology and repowers is very difficult, very costly to engineer. So Tier 3 is the fit, and retrofits are part of that as long as the masking and the safety meet the criteria. But today, as far as Tier 4 final equipment for equipment replacements, for us, that's probably the strongest direction we've been able to go over the last few years. And today, most manufacturers, especially with the Caterpillar manufacturer, a Tier 4 final is available in all horsepower and all machine ranges. So we were really concerned, again, about the large fleets losing the opportunity to replace a lot of those big Tier 0s that we believe will be running lots of high hours over the next 3 to 5 years. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great comment about the fact that Tier 4s may not have been available when the eligibility was there for large fleets. So,
Hi, I'm Lauren Dunlap. Good to see everybody. Okay, more generally speaking, on slide 14 was the title was Leveraging Allowed to Date. There were two columns, one for 2011 and then 2015. And 2011 had the ARF, VTP, CEC, AB 118 money. But in the column for the modified 2016, I guess my eyes are bad. It's not listed anymore.
Those are
additive?
Those are additive,
Okay.
yes. What happened was there was a separate bill in 2011 that specifically opened up Moyer, which had no leveraging ability up till that point. It opened the door a little way in 2011, and then SB 513 gave us much broader ability, and the 2016 was basically just to show what was just added as of January 1 of this year.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful, thanks. So, the $275K for school buses, the new special purpose cost effectiveness limit for the high advanced technology school bus projects, is that kind of a hint of what we might be looking at in the new re-envisioned Moyer program, where different categories would have different CE limits, or is there a possibility that you'll get away from that and migrate more to a 1B or a ARFEPT incentive-based program where it's sort of a flat fee? If you do this type of project, this is the money that you would get to do it, which gets you away from you might still have rankings, but anyway, I'm just curious how what's being tossed around on how this all might look later. I did a back of the envelope calculation for a refuse truck going from a 2010 NOx, 2010 engine that, was a 0.2 NOx engine to a low NOx, near zero engine. And I think they'd qualify for about $429 for a 10-year project.
And that is exactly the reason why cost effectiveness was changed from the old paradigm of here's a flat cap that will let you adjust for inflation. And why SB 513 was needed is because we're reaching a point where we still have an increasing need to move to ever cleaner technologies, but we cannot provide a meaningful incentive to a consumer, and I use that in the broadest sense. A business that wants to make the leap is not going to buy a truck that is $50,000 more expensive because we're giving them $500 more. And so with SB 513, we have the ability to figure out what cost effectiveness limits are going to give us the opportunity to make meaningful incentive payments as we look at these near zero and zero technologies. I would say that there is certainly for purposes of discussion, we are open to receiving comments on whether it would make sense to have a separate cost effectiveness by source category or whatever. I would say that the program has been fundamentally very successful having a single cost effectiveness cap that applies to everything, and then having other, you can call them policy overlays, other restrictions to ensure that the program supports other goals. And the example would be the fleet size limitation for on-road in the last years of implementation of the on-road truck and bus program. And as Matt mentioned earlier, as we enter a new regulatory regime where that is fully implemented, maybe that fleet size cap doesn't make as much sense as it used to. And maybe that makes sense, or maybe some restriction makes sense for one category but not for another. I would say that the large fleet issue that the other gentlemen have raised for off-road is a good example where certainly it made some sense in terms of ensuring that money was available to small fleets, but there is a lost opportunity that we need to look at. So as we look at the overall cost effectiveness limit, we need to look at these longer term technologies and the longer term benefits that we'll get. And we do want to incentivize the cleanest replacement where possible, which is why in the presentation you saw some reference to de-emphasizing retrofits, for instance. Retrofits are good. They work for complying with an in-use rule. We are trying to look at the program for looking in the next 10 years and beyond, and ensure that we can get those cleaner technologies, beyond what a retrofit provides. So that's a long-winded answer, perhaps not an actual answer, a long-winded response to the question. I think we are open to looking at potentially very high cost effectiveness values per ton that certainly would induce sticker shock compared to what we've seen previously. What we have seen previously is based on diesel to diesel. It was not meant to enable diesel to low NOx CNG. It was not meant to enable diesel to electric. We need to basically shift our sense of scale. I think the school bus is a good example in that there is a greater good that was widespread acknowledgement that cleaning up school buses was a good idea, which is one reason why SB 513 specifically called them out for their own independent cost effectiveness, and basically said, let's make it work with the existing lower emission school bus program because we've already determined that it is worth $200,000 or whatever the number is to replace a school bus and to get all those benefits of doing so. Let's not have it be a different number because the money's coming from a different source. And in fact, in some cases, it's actually coming from the same source of the district's local funds. I think also what needs to be taken into account, and I'll get off my soapbox soon, I promise, is with the greater opportunities that leveraging with other funding sources brings us, there may be cases where we may not need to provide all that funding ourselves through the Moyer program because we can work with other funding programs, and we want to work cooperatively with those other funding programs to achieve those multiple goals. And the greenhouse gas funds, ARFVTP, is a perfect example of that, where they can spend some money and get the greenhouse gas reductions. Moyer can spend some money and get the criteria emission reductions and the toxics reductions. And the benefit, it goes to everybody. It goes to the applicant who gets more funding to get that much cleaner vehicle instead of a little bit cleaner vehicle. And it goes to the to the citizens of California who get cleaner air, less toxics, and less greenhouse gases.
Do you think in that last scenario, are you envisioning that as the applicant, I would hit up these different programs and collect my piles of money? Or are you saying at the state strategic level, you would aggregate the funds from the different places so that somebody gets one large award and they get one contract, they do one reporting? It's very streamlined that way.
I think initially it is going to be a little bit of a informed applicant shopping around. Longer term, it is certainly our goal to identify upfront as much as possible where we see the synergies between the funds and, hopefully, certainly within ARB, there's some coordination that we already do to try to make things work. And you saw for light duty, for instance, we are very actively pursuing making Moyer work with the Enhanced Fleet Modernization Program in a complementary role. We want to work with other groups like CEC to make sure that that we are coordinating. I think some of that is going to take some time to work out, but I would say that it's in everybody's best interest for us, CEC, other agencies, the air districts, to basically identify how we can bring those funds together to basically deliver it to an applicant. But again, initially, I think it's, an applicant is going to have to do the work because we're breaking new ground for everybody.
Along those lines, do you think it'll be the 1B model where you can leverage with just one other source and limit it to Moyer plus one only? Or are you picturing that there would be 2, 3, 4 different possibilities?
We need to give that some serious thought, because the nature of the Moyer statute is we still need to be SIP creditable. We do still need to be cost effective, although the leveraging provisions mean that we don't need to necessarily take into account all this, all the funds from other programs. But ensuring that we have sufficient safeguards when we leverage is very important to us. It's something that came up as SB 513 was debated. How do we make sure that we don't pay for more than the value of a project? That means we need to track where these other funds are coming from. If somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I've got 100 other grants from different programs that I've patchworked together, and I want to add you to it," we'd want to be very careful to make sure that everything being added to it is not contradicting what our ground rules are. I'm not prepared right now to say we would limit it to just one. I think we're open to more than one, but we'd need to be very careful because we do need to make sure that those safeguards exist.
Sounds like a good job for your Carl your Carl programming team. One last question. When you remind us about the old days, and it was a diesel to diesel program, and now it's diesel to advanced technology program, or even maybe a natural gas to electric, or some other new scenarios that are now on the horizon. When I'm trying to teach my port friends who aren't so close to Moyer how this works, I always focus more on kind of a fuel neutral perspective. It's that the gap is so small now. That's what's driving this, right? So
yes, and actually, thank you for noting that. I tend to use diesel to diesel as a shortcut, to a scenario where we were at 10 grams and now we're getting down to 0.2, and that's wonderful. But now we're going from 0.2 to 0.02 or to 0. And honestly, the incremental or the marginal difference in cost between 0.02 and 0 is likely to be much, much higher than the cost it took to move from 8 to 0.2. So yes, it is still our intention in general to be fuel neutral. However, 0 is always preferred over non-zero. Is probably a good thing for people to keep in mind.
Hi, my name is, sorry, it's loud. My name is Corey Zupo, and I'm with United Airlines. And I just wanted to foreshadow on previous comments about limiting funding for large fleets. I know we recently went through Carl Morrill funding, which was great, but we target our belt loaders, which are only 40 horsepower. We do have quite a large fleet of the larger horsepower engines we'd like to replace. Just at the time, the technology didn't exist. And I know with our folks that do the purchasing, sometimes they're hesitant for the Tier 0 and Tier 1 larger horsepower to replace them on our own funds because they don't trust the technology. some of the larger horsepower, the SCR systems clog up because at an airport there's a lot of stop and go, so the engines don't reach the proper temperature. So I know for a company like United Airlines, it would help if the larger fleets were able to still do the CARB Moyer funding, because we have a lot of Tier 1 and Tier 0 larger horsepower we'd like to eventually replace.
Okay, thank you for that.
Hi, thanks. It's Matt again. Just real quick, I remembered kind of during this cost effectiveness discussion, eligible engines, especially in light of potential cost sharing with other programs, and I don't know how much longer 1B is going to be around for. We'll see, but the 7 through 9 OEM equipped on-road engines, that should be something, it shouldn't be cut off because, I mean, at least in VIP right now, it's 2006 and earlier, you have to be retrofitted. A lot of people, that's the only way you can be eligible is if you have all retrofits. So just to keep that in mind, we'll continue to open up the opportunities for these larger fleets and to echo this love fest of large fleets. I think that, you guys really heed this advice from the off-road side and the on-road side, especially in the initial outset of this. These guys are going to be the ones who are more than willing, especially if there's some flexibility where it's not like for like, as this gentleman was talking about, for some serious reductions. The large fleets, they might be well-heeled, deep-pocketed, whatever. And I understand there's a resistance against subsidizing corporate America in this state, but at the same time, I would, appreciate you guys recognizing that throughout the process, that this is in fact something that this high cost of these technologies can really only be offset by those who have the balance sheets to maintain it.
This is Catherine Wirtz with KEW Grant Services. We work with operators to identify and apply for incentive funds like CARB Moyer. We face a few obstacles in the process. One is identifying and justifying historical usage, which oftentimes helps or determines the amount of funding that an applicant receives. We'd like to suggest possibly using notch-specific fuel consumption as an alternative to total annual hours or just fuel consumption. We'd also like to suggest new purchase opportunities as a project category. We have operators that are actually expanding their operations and would like to implement Tier 4 technology, but it's about 10 times difference in cost. So they end up going with unregulated vehicles instead.
I'm sorry, did you say notch specific?
Notch specific.
NOTCH? What is that?
For locomotives.
Okay.
Grams per brake horsepower hour for emissions. It would be gallons per brake horsepower hour for fuel.
Yes, this is Drew Delaney from Associates Environmental again. This is not about the off-road equipment, but I haven't heard anybody speak up for infrastructure. I'm curious to know, because historically, CARB Moyer funding has been given to people turning in one type of equipment for a cleaner type of equipment. Would the infrastructure projects that are funded by CARB Moyer funding be dedicated to conversion of conventional fuel now to cleaner, fuel that provides low emission or no emission opportunities to vehicles on the road?
I think it's fair to say that that's the intent, is to basically enable greater adoption of cleaner technologies. The statute language is fairly broad. I certainly would find it odd if an air district who ultimately has the power to select actual projects would be interested in infrastructure that did not accomplish that transformation in some way. We are, at least right now, being very open to the possibilities of infrastructure, essentially servicing technology, transportation technology. But as you saw from the slide, we're pretty open right now for considering different sources of that power and different types of transportation that the power would be used for. There's also the opportunity under SB 513 for air districts to use their local funds to fund infrastructure as well. So one of the questions that we are considering is where the need for the focus on the Carl Moyer infrastructure is, because we want to complement that, not be necessarily redundant with that. And that overall is actually one of the other goals that is implicit in our thinking, but perhaps we haven't made as explicit, which is the Moyer program is wonderful in that it reaches statewide. It has regular annual funding, but ultimately it's not an inexhaustible pot of funding. And we do want to make sure that our efforts as we develop these new guidelines go to where there is actually a need for funding. We want to work with other sources of funding. We don't want to, duplicate them. If there's plenty of funding coming in from other sources, maybe we don't need to work so hard on figuring out how to answer every possible scenario within the Moyer program. One of the reasons that we are having this series of 3 initial workshops throughout the state is to make sure that we hear where the interest really is on stakeholders. Certainly we are informed by the various initiatives and plans and obligations that are out there, like the SIP, the Sustainable Freight Strategy, the Mobile Source Strategy, et cetera. But we also need to know where there is interest from applicants. And I think that, certainly we are hearing there's a lot of off-road interest from large fleets in particular who see an opportunity to really move to that cleanest technology. And that's something that I think we need to take back and talk to our folks about in serious serious discussions as to how to handle that.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question on your comment. When you're talking about fuel conversion infrastructure, were you talking on the vehicle equipment or at the station, like a change in the fueling infrastructure that way?
Yeah, I meant the station.
At the station, okay.
Usually we have to take a diesel engine and convert it to a cleaner diesel engine or some other technology like that. I'm envisioning a station that already hands out gasoline or diesel and converting that entire station into low emission fuel. That way it, provides the same sort of incentive.
Okay, thank you.
While Kathy's moving
Frank,
the microphone,
Frank,
I just want to ask, I'm sorry, Brad.
For Air District personnel, let's ask the questions with ARB later because we are working with them on the guidelines.
Kyle, do we have any questions from the internet, from the web? Okay.
Oh, thank you. I just have one more note to add to our efforts over the last few years with Moyer contracts and off-road fleets. What we also noticed, I would say over the last 3 years, I would say probably about 30 applications for medium and small fleets that we've applied. And out of probably most of them, 25 plus, have all qualified for the cost effectiveness limit. All of them but just 2 actually accepted the contract offers. And so what we believe also is that the participation level of small and medium fleets will struggle in this period moving forward as well.
I'm Jim Wirtz from Knoxville Locomotive Corporation. Having been involved with Air Resources Board over the last 15 to 20 years with locomotives, one comment that is important as we advance cleaner emissions engines is that the railroad industry for some 50 to 60 years was really predominated by two engine manufacturers, which really weren't so much engine manufacturers as they were locomotive manufacturers, which is a distinct difference. And that was EMD and General Electric. Today, as a result of work done by the Air Resources Board and the EPA in Washington, that advancement now has brought in basically 5 engine manufacturers to the locomotive industry, all of which has been handled more or less in the last 15 and 10 years. And those now include MTU, which is a Rolls-Royce Mercedes company for diesel engines, Cummins, and also Caterpillar. So what you've been doing in pushing the industry, if you will, and particularly an industry like railroads, which is kind of lethargic up until the last 20 years, in that pretty much the old was the way to continue forward. And so there's been some great advancement, which has also helped the older companies, if you would, because now they're becoming much more market competitive on an international basis. So the work that you've done has been very helpful to the locomotive industry in moving forward, because it's been glacier-like in its movement toward change in the past. Relative, though, to some of the things that, from my observations over the years, is that I do think you need to eliminate the Band-Aid approach on retrofits. I don't think that's very effective any longer. I think administratively it is costly to the Air Resources Board, and going straight to Tier 4 is a much more effective approach, because you have to remember, in the locomotive industry, a lot of those locomotives date all the way back to the 1940s. A lot in the 50s and a predominance in the 60s and 70s. And by going to Tier 0 or Tier 1 or Tier 2, by changing power assemblies or idle limiting devices, actually discourages movement toward Tier 4, because they've made some sort of effort to get to Tier 0 or Tier 1, which in effect is obsolete to begin with. So that'd be a point, I think, going forward that should be considered, that would be both a cost savings to the Air Resources Board on the expenditure of their funds, and really move quicker toward Tier 4 deployment. One of the things also is that with the advancement in Tier 4 with certain engine manufacturers, is that and it's already posted, I think, on the Air Resources Board site, is that with MTU, as an example, some of the future locomotives will be coming out at well less than Tier 4 or sub-Tier 4 emissions criteria, NOx and PM being the two primaries, where NOx may be down to, rather than the 1.3 grams per brake horsepower hour, will actually coming out at 0.5. So it's that much lower than Tier 4. And one of the things I think that would be advantageous for Air Resources Board to consider is where a credit can be obtained for that differential. And how that credit is applied is something you folks perhaps could consider and debate internally. But that would be a stronger incentive as well, because with your funding for Tier 4 locomotive replacements and or repowers, you're going to be getting a lot more for your money than just Tier 4. There's also, when it comes to replacements versus repowers, is that, to expand on Catherine's point, is that right now, if you have an expansion in a locomotive revenue production by a Class 1 or Class 2 or Class 3, they're allowed to bring in unregulated locomotives for expanding markets simply because it's under federal reg. But to encourage Tier 4 as business expands, which is important right now in a very recessionary economy for the railway industry, I think it's important to waive that, and rather than having companies bring in unregulated locomotives for a 2-year period and then apply, because you have to have that 2-year history, it'd be much better to do that up front. That would also encourage the advancement on new business opportunities by, rather than penalizing and saying, bring in old locomotives that are going to be unregulated in terms of emissions, run them 2 years, and then you can apply. Do it up front and eliminate that criteria for expanded business opportunities. The other one that has always been a point which I don't clearly understand, and that is there's never been a credit for fuel savings. Fuel savings is a given. The importance is grams per brake horsepower hour, and if you really think about that, you have a lot of opportunity for a reduction in emissions when you eliminate the fuel criteria. In other words, if you have a new engine going in that's Tier 4, and that engine, which in most of these cases is true, they're much more fuel efficient than the older engines. Remember, the majority of these locomotives have employed EMD and GE engines that date back to 1940 and 1950 designs. So they're extremely, by comparison to today, they gobble up fuel at very high rates. When you go to Tier 4 and do it by grams per brake horsepower hour, there's no inclusion or credit for the reduced fuel savings. In many cases, with advanced technology changes on tractive effort, as an example, which is more on the electronic side of the business, is that you can achieve 50% or more fuel savings reductions, but there's no credit given. It's all back to grams per brake horsepower hour. So it's you're getting a great benefit, obviously, by going to Tier 4, but I think there should be recognition of what that fuel savings is compared to these older engines, because it's very, very significant. And in some cases, with the enhanced electronic control systems for tractive effort, you can also do 2-for-1 replacements. You can actually, with the same locomotive, do the work of what one locomotive would today by using the new technology. So just some comments for consideration, but the fuel savings is really an anomaly that you bring in a Tier 4, or maybe you're marginal, and it may have an impact on whether or not you're going to be funded at 80% or 60% or 40% or 25, whatever it might be, and yet you're generating with that new technology of 40 or 50% fuel savings. I would just encourage you to reconsider fuel savings as one of the considerations toward emissions reduction, because it is significant with the newer engines.
Yeah, if I can speak on that for a second. SB 513 does basically limit us as to what we can, specifically fund, which is the criteria pollutant and the toxic reductions. But the leveraging opportunities that are opened up actually provide an opportunity for technologies that reduce fuel usage to basically benefit from, for instance, greenhouse gas reduction programs that may be able to recognize that reduction in fuel usage in a better way than, since Moyer cannot. And so leveraging provides an opportunity, at the bottom line, for those projects to potentially get more funding, even if Moyer itself does not increase its funding. So that's an example of some of the possibilities that SB 513 has opened up for us. And as we mentioned in one of my previous answers, initially, we're not going to be able to put all the pieces together from all the various things that are out there right away, but longer term, we are going to try to identify, those natural fits between programs and basically help applicants be aware of, hey, you can apply for both of these simultaneously, and this is how it would work for you. So
Okay,
that's a
that'd
good
be
point. Thank you.
positive. The only other question I had pertained to an explanation of hoods and the investment that is being made. I don't understand exactly what the function of hoods are and how that benefits locomotive emissions.
We will turn that over to David Salardino, who is manager over our locomotive portion of the Moyer program.
The hoods are our technology that's coming out, or it has come out actually, and is actually funded also under our Prop 1B program. That is basically you can think of it as not like a vacuum, but it's an entrapment for the emissions from the locomotive when it's parked, it's stationary, say. That is then cleaned up through that. So it's almost like a retrofit that's not actually on the locomotive itself.
Well, a couple things to
they've
that
been
is-
utilized in marine as well.
Okay, I can understand on marine when you have a parked vessel at a port for a week or so, but on locomotives, I find it very difficult to understand how there's a benefit. For number one, that's what idle limiting devices, automatic engine stop systems do. Two, a locomotive manufacturer or a locomotive end user is not going to turn around just when a locomotive is parked and pull it under a hood. It should be shut off to begin with, right? An automatic engine start-stop would facilitate it. So thinking that if you put a hood somewhere and a locomotive end user is going to turn around and move that locomotive to the spot where the hood is just to sit it there and keep it idling, man, I find the logic behind hoods remarkably incompetent. It just doesn't make sense. And I think if there's any money spent on that in the future, it needs to be reevaluated very, very carefully. Just a comment.
That's a great note. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, so back before the hood technology discussion, Scott, your response about the fuel savings benefit made me think maybe we've just uncovered one of those things where you have to watch for double counting, because when you calculate the emission benefits of the locomotive project, if they use 100,000 gallons in the baseline technology in the new project, if the applicant claims, now I'm only using 70,000 gallons, we build that into the calculation already, so they do get credit from their Moyer award because they're burning less fuel in the second, in the new reduced emission case. Or not, maybe because, so that's my question is it double counting if they also got greenhouse gas reduction funds because they're not using 30,000 gallons a year of fuel that they used to use? Even if they got Moyer money for the benefit.
Yeah, I think that shows where it's very important that we don't leap too far ahead on the leveraging, because we do have to worry about those safeguards, and there are going to be, I think, similar examples in virtually every category where the benefit may be implicit in our calculations of other benefits, and we will need to unpack that to make sure that we are not basically, spending the public dollar from Moyer and the public dollar from another program to buy the same thing. It's a very good point, and part of what we need to keep an eye on as we develop the devilish details of the new guidelines. I'm going to send out a message into the internet ether again. If there's anybody out there with questions, please send them to carlhelp@arb.ca.gov. It looks like the questions are at least slowing down here in the room, so you may be losing your opportunity. Those of you following this on the web, we definitely want to hear any comments you have. I should mention that even after the workshop formally concludes, that email address is still open and valid, and we will get your comments. And of course, it's open to anybody who's actually attending the workshop who has additional thoughts that they care to share with us later as well. So basically, I am vamping for time just in case somebody is frantically typing away and trying to hit send. But are there any more questions from anybody in the room at this time?
And while we're doing that, I'd just like to add, particularly for those folks who have actually asked some questions, but basically for all of you, please make sure that you leave your information on the outside with us so that we can contact you later on if we have some follow-up.
I just have a quick question. How long is the commenting period open till?
That is an excellent question. This process, if we can pull up the next step slide, this process is going to be a long one. I want to say it's the slide before. Oh, there we go. We do hope to take all the input we receive from these workshops and additional written comments, additional meetings. We are certainly open to additional meetings for people who want to get into some specifics with us. We are hoping to have a second workshop sometime in the summer. So if you wish to have an impact on what we discuss and present at that second workshop, I would say if you get us something in the next couple of months, that's good. Certainly sooner is always better because that gives us a chance to think about it more and to make sure we can take your suggestions and integrate them with others. In the summer, we will have a second workshop. It will probably not be a series of 3. Right now, we're planning on it being a single webcast or webinar workshop held probably in our Sacramento offices. But at that point, we would basically be back with some more concrete directions based on the input that we've received and discussions with folks. And at that point, there would be another opportunity to comment, of course, as we develop actual guideline language that we would then publish basically 45 days before the public, before presenting the guidelines to the board. And the reason for that is there is a mandatory 45-day formal comment period with the language available. So actually, if you want to get right down to it, you can comment right up until the board bangs the gavel down and says the item is closed sometime in spring of 2017. So there's a lot of time. However, it takes time to work through the details, like the example just heard on calculating how we might leverage funds for locomotives. So the sooner we get any input, the better it is. So we are always open to the input, but get it to us now and we can think about it more.
Hi, Scott, probably last comment. Are you suggesting then for those of us who have made public comment at this and then in the next 2 workshops that we should, I guess, shore up our public comments by submitting something semi-formal to you via written, signed? Obviously, it's not going into the docket at this point in time, but is that something that you guys would feel more comfortable with to take away specific comments outside of just this particular commenting period over the next 2 workshops?
At the risk of angering my staff, the more you give us, the better. Certainly we can, we will come out of here with an idea of what the concerns were and everything. I've been taking notes, staff has been taking notes. If you believe that there's a nuance that, maybe may not have been clear, it's definitely in your best interest to, put it in writing and send it to us. That helps ensure that your viewpoint is fully represented. It's not essential, but, again, it can't hurt. Our goal is to be much like SB 513 and the development of those principles that led to it. Our goal is to really listen to stakeholders and to give as much opportunity as we can to get feedback, because as Neva mentioned, the program has to work for small districts, big districts, and medium-sized districts. It also has to work for applicants in all the categories that we're going to wind up supporting. The more input we have on issues you want us to consider, the more likelihood we will be able to figure out a way to incorporate that. Now, having said that, there are going to be obviously some suggestions that wind up not making it to the final draft. So I'm not, promising if you tell me you want something, you want every project to have engines that are painted purple. I can't guarantee that. What I can guarantee is we will take your suggestions, your comments, your questions, and give them serious consideration. We will also be sharing them with our partners at the air districts to basically make sure that they are aware of what you are asking for and why, what you want to accomplish, how you see the program proceeding, so we can have, hopefully a very well-informed recommendation to our board in 2017.
Great. I think that that's important that you had said that, especially for some folks who might be new to this process. And on that note, don't wait until the gavel falls before you start giving comment, whatever you do. So thank you very much, Ed.
All right, last call for any internet comments. You had one job to do, Kyle. I do want to thank everybody for showing up and for providing us your thoughts and comments. Please continue to stay involved with the process. The email again, carlhelp@arb.ca.gov. You also have contact info in the presentation for Doug, Neva, and myself. In some cases, we may divert your comments to particular staff people, either in ARB or in the air districts who are specifically addressing these issues. And so you may hear from somebody other than one of the three of us. As a matter of fact, I can guarantee you it's probably likely you will not hear directly from me, as I like to delegate. But again, please send us your thoughts. Thank you all very much.